Ladies and gentlemen, China is waging its own war on drugs and they are failing. They are doing so poorly. And right now, the ones that are trafficking drugs and making the fentanyl and shipping it, they are actually winning now. So this came out in the National Interest, April 3rd, 2018. China is waging its own war on drugs, and it's a total disaster. Every year, tens of thousands of people worldwide died from opioid-related overdose, many of which are linked to the synthetic opioids that come out of China. That's primarily where the bulk of the sources are being shipped from. Now, I know just from reading past articles, ladies and gentlemen, China have a hard time locating many of these labs that are making the fentanyl. See, the labs are now smarter. They'll set up shop and they're constantly moving around. They don't stay in the same location for a long period of time. And so many of them are what you would consider underground. So being that they move around so often, it's hard for the police to catch up to them. You know, unlike here in the US, when they set up a meth lab in a house, see, they don't move around a lot. They keep that meth lab in that one location and they end up getting busted. Well, these folks over in China, they learned how to stay steps ahead of the police. Okay, so these calls ignore China's own domestic war on drugs, one rooted in the memory of the country's humiliation at the hands of the Imperial British in 1839 through 42, Opium War. Following the Chinese Communist Party seizure of power in 1949, the party moved to eradicate domestic drug use and production through a mixture of compulsory detention and brutal repression, which means China gave their people an ultimatum. You either get off of the drugs or die. And the ones that kept right on doing drugs got placed in front of firing squads and they were taken out. That's how they got rid of their drug habit from opiums back then. Okay. So China, is a closed border country. But drug use still goes on in China. Don't think for one moment because it's communist and it's China that there's no drug use. There's a lot of drug use going on in China as well. Okay, drug use. First opioids like heroin and later amphetamine type stimulants quickly spread from China's southern borders and to ports to the rest of the country. In response, China launched a 3-decade-long people's war on drugs. Detention has been the primary weapon. Drug use can carry a 2-year sentence in a compulsory drug detention center. Since drug use is a non-criminal offense in China, which they are making it that way all of a sudden from this plague in the country of opioids, but it sure was a criminal act during the crack epidemic. Okay. Forced labor and detainee abuse has been widely documented at these centers. Most are former re-education through labor camp run by the Ministry of Public Security and the Ministry of Justice. Individuals released from detention are registered with the government and placed under police supervision for a further 3 years, during which time the subjected to scheduled and random. So they got to take a random urine test even when they get out of the detention center. So if they test positive, they go immediately back to detention. That's how it's done in China. And of course, in this article is telling you this type of detention is failing. This is how China ran it for decades. It's failing. The relapse rate among former detainees is as high as 90%. It's just like rehab here in the US. 90% of the time they fall off the wagon and they're back on the drugs. And as you can see, although China put these people through hard labor and put them in detention centers, 90% of the time they go right back to the drug. So now they're registered drug offenders in China has blown up to 250,000 in 1992 to 2.5 million in 2016. 2.5 million. And estimates of unregistered individuals, unreliable, and could run as high as 14 million. So despite having these detention centers that people go to, they have not been able to control the drug addiction in China. There you go. And high-profile arrests like Jackie Chan's son, J.C. Chan, for drug offenses in 2014 obscure the fact that from 1998 to 2016, the proportion of drug users listed as underemployed or unemployed rose from 45.2% to 61.6%. That's a lot of unemployed people with drug offenses in China. That's very high. So what this is pretty much saying, the Chinese government now sees that these detention centers really don't eliminate the drug use that's going on. So for 14 years, China has also been using methadone as a means of getting people off of heroin in China. They have needle exchange programs for the last 14 years. And they still haven't conquered their drug problem. Wow. All these nations, because Russia also has a major, major drug problem there. And it just seems like all of these countries that have a high number of Asians and Europeans, those are the places that have off the chart drug epidemics. Okay. So you have Russia, the Philippines, and the US that are all trying to do different types of interventions as far as drugs are concerned. And it's not working in any of these places. Russia, they give them aspirins and they have to they have to withdraw with nothing but given the use of aspirin. So we know the Russian program. First, North America, harm reduction interventions aim to reduce both opioid-related overdoses and the spread of HIV, which they're failing on both. The HIV is exploding in rural areas right now in this country. But China harm reduction programs focus overwhelmingly on tackling HIV alone. China's first major outbreak of the disease occurred among injecting users of heroin, sharing needles. So in the early 2000s, drug injection was the primary driver of HIV/AIDS in China. Methadone, so they use a drug to cure you from being addicted to a drug. And needles exchange programs where the government's successful response to this health crisis. Okay, so over a decade, drug use patterns in China have changed 2005, 78% of all registered drug users took heroin. By 2016, 60% were using non-opioid amphetamines type stimulants. And despite these changes, harm reduction remains heroin focused. Opioid substitution treatments are clearly inappropriate for people who use non-opioids. For health officials concerned with the spread of HIV/AIDS, there is little incentive to fund drug harm reduction programs aimed at people who do not inject heroin and who are unlikely to contract the disease through the sharing of needles. Woo, I tell you, it's bad all over. Major drug problems in China, major drug problems in the US and everywhere. Canada. So you can clearly see China is struggling bad, and they are actually failing in their war on drugs. And the US really is too. You got more people on the drugs and dying from the drugs every single year. So that's a failure too. The problem is in the US, they don't want to do nothing to the junkie, but they want to punish everybody else and exclude the junkie. And it just simply will not work. And it has not worked for 20 years. And it will not work going into the future with them with amnesty and everybody else gets punished. Listen to me now. It ain't going to work. It's not working. It's never worked. Please tell me what you think. Please leave your comment and subscribe. Don't forget to hit on the notification bell. And if you can support my channel, please do. And I will see you on the next video. Peace, family.